Hey everyone, Pastor Scott here. It's been a few weeks, but we are bouncing back into our continued study of the Bible narrative. When we last left off, we were talking about the beginning of the story of Abram, or Abraham as he's better known, and his wife Sarah, or Sarai as she's initially called. This is the first part of their story as God calls Abram to go to the land that I will show you, and I will make you a great nation, and you will be blessed, and your name will be blessed, and all the world will be blessed through you. So that's the first part. And That's really kind of what we looked at. We did not get to the point yet where they began to have children. That's where we're going to pick up this week. Now, this week we bring Hagar into the story as well with Abraham and Sarah. I'm just going to refer to them as Abraham and Sarah. The name change for both of them actually happens in this portion that we're going to look at this week. But I'm just going to go with that. So that is kind of what's going on. The chapters of Genesis that are kind of really applicable in this particular week are Genesis 16 and 17 and then 21. So we're going to skip a bit of a portion within there. A bit of a recap, though, as I mentioned, God has made the promise. God has given Abraham a sign of, or actually more than one sign of what that his descendants will be like. That he says, look at the stars. Your descendants will be like the stars in the heaven, and look at the grains of sand on the seashore. Your descendants will be like this as well. But it's signs of this covenant that God has made with them. Also, when we left off, there was a physical situation that went on, which dates back to some of the practices where they took animals and they slaughtered them and cut them in half, and then you pass between them and saying that if I do not uphold my end of the covenant, may what happened to these animals happen to me. That was a way that they established their covenants that way. So that had all happened previously. Now, when we pick up in chapter 16, a great deal of time has gone by. Abraham's now in his mid 80s. Sarah's about 10 years younger, and there is no heir, and yet God had told them, you will have children. So Sarah takes matters into her own hands. Now, there's a practice at the time that slave women could be given to the husband to have children with. In the case of barrenness, which was Sarah's situation, and that's exactly what happens, and that's how Hagar comes into this situation. She's a slave woman of Sarah, and Sarah gives her to Abraham to have children, and of course it works. This results in the birth of Ishmael in the long run, and it also creates a great deal of strife between Hagar and Sarah, probably for obvious reasons. But one of the things that I really kind of key in on is how is Hagar with this whole situation? I can't imagine it sounded real great to her, and that's something to definitely be aware of, especially now in a day and age when women's rights and assault and so many different things are in play. That's something to take notice of, and to see that when humanity tries to act for God, things don't always go so well. Now, Hagar is at the same time, even though there's issues, she also encounters the divine, and there's some significance there. Hagar actually dares to name God, which is a pretty big deal, and Ishmael is blessed in the long run, and we do see that. And now in chapter 17, God's now finally ready to act. It fast forwards about 13, 14 years to where Abraham is almost 100 years old and Sarah's about 90. And finally, God's ready to act. And there's an announcement of that. And then we see in the long run that here we go. Now, finally, after all these years of faithful believing, God will do what God's going to do. God's going to do it. Now, we're skipping over chapters 18 and 19, just zipping through them, and 20 as well. When we have some angels that visit initially, and Sarah says to Sarah, you will conceive, and she laughs at them. There's that brief story, but then we switch over into the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. If you're familiar with that, things don't end well for Sodom and Gomorrah, but that is in there, and we see that Abraham goes in and saves Lot, who was there. So that's kind of in there. And then in chapter 20, there's a repeat of the situation where Abraham claims that Sarah is his sister in order to avoid being killed and benefits from it financially. So that whole situation repeats. We heard about that last time as well. But that goes on. And then finally in chapter 21, Sarah conceives. Isaac is born, the child of the promise. And with this, then we begin to see the ramping up of the tension between Hagar and Sarah again, probably over being the mothers of these two boys. Sarah wants Isaac to receive the inheritance, and Ishmael, son of a slave, should not have it. So basically, she wants Hagar to get kicked out. And we see that tension. Hagar's again encounters the divine, and we have a repeat of the blessing for Ishmael as well. But that's kind of all what's going on there in chapter 21. Now, Abraham and Sarah's story does continue on beyond this. This is going to kind of end what we're going to talk about. Their story does continue, though. Though Sarah eventually dies before Abraham, later on, Abraham actually remarries and has more children. That's farther down the line, but we do see that before eventually he dies, and we shift then into the next generations. We have Isaac and his life, which has some similarities to Abraham in that his wife Rebecca was also barren for a long time before finally conceiving and having children. And then we have Jacob and Esau, the next generation, and then Jacob who also becomes Israel and his sons, and that leads to Joseph, and Joseph leads to Egypt, and that's kind of how Exodus closes out. So that's what's coming up. However, that being said, within our in-person group, we've talked about it, and we've decided to shift over into the New Testament. That's going to help out some of our members of that in-person group. So in upcoming weeks, that's what we're going to focus on. We're going to shift over to that. Once that is completed, we will likely come back and pick up with the Old Testament again. So if you have been following along online, that's kind of what we're going to see, but we very likely will come back to that. If that is the case, please let me know. Drop a comment or whatever saying if you're kind of following along. I haven't had a whole lot of encounters that way. So if you're out there, let me know, and we'll kind of pick things back up again. But that's what we're going to see in upcoming weeks. Just a heads up there. As usual, I'll throw some discussion questions into the comment section, so look for those, and we will go ahead and continue our conversation. Thanks, everyone.